Hello students, once again today we will be meeting with a new lecture on geomorphology, that is coastal process and the landforms. There are two types of coastline. Whichever part of the world, wherever it is, which climatic area, these are the two type of coastline that we are always going to find. One is called as the submergent coastline and one is called as the emergent coastline. Submergent coastline are those coasts which are the result of rise in the sea level. Submergent coast is, we will find it in many parts of Maharashtra as well. In this, the landform is underwater. Ria coastline is an example of the coast of submergence. Submergent shorelines, there are two very vivid example of submergent shoreline. One is the Ria coast and one is the fjord coast. Ria coast is nothing but the flooded river valleys. It could be due to tectonics or it could be due to a climate change that sometimes the land is submerged underwater. So as the river is entering into the sea, previously the profile was completely adjusted to the base level. If the land is submerged, river gets flooded and it gives rise to the first type, which is called as the Ria coast. Fjord coast is extremely common in the areas where the glacier are present, like in Sweden or in Norway. These are the flooded glacial valleys. Estuary. Estuary is nothing but as the river is entering into the sea, sometimes they create delta and sometimes they don't. So estuary is the meeting point between the river and the sea. And estuary many times is affected by the rise and fall in the sea level, and therefore some time of the day as the high tide is coming, the river flows backward. And as the low tide is there, the river comes backward towards the sea. Here I would like to say one thing. Estuaries are extensively formed. There are a number of estuaries in the coastal plains of Maharashtra, or we can say the western coast of India, whereas in the eastern coast of India we have got lots of delta. These are the satellite pictures of the fjords. This is how it looks like. They are the glaciated valleys which are flooded. This is the actual photograph of a fjord, which is very clean and U-shaped valley which is flooded by. Originally it was occupied by glacier during an ice age. After the ice has got melted, this is becoming a river, but the feature is called as fjord. In Norway and Sweden, we have got a number of such kind of fjords which are spectacular, and they are even the tourist places. This is an example of emergent coastline where we can see the terraces. The terraces which we can see is the result of, as the land is coming up, as the sea is going down, it is creating different steps. These are some of the photographs. Here, H stands for headland and B stands for bay. All the coastal areas, or at least most of the coastal areas, have headland and bay arrangement. Bay is where the sea beaches are formed. Next point is the shore zone. Let us define what a shore is. When we go to any coastal area or any sea beaches, as we stand and look towards into the ocean, we will see the waves coming towards us and it goes backward again. During the high tide every day, there is a point up to which the water is coming, and during the low tide up to a point where the water goes down. So we are looking at a whole profile which we call it as the shore zone. So let us define what is a shore zone. In fact, the point of high tide and low tide, that is called as the forezone. the point behind that, up to a point where we can see the sea, beach and steps, which we call it as burn, we call it as the back shore. These two together is what we call it as beach. Sand dunes are also found in the coastal areas, and they are behind. There are three factors which are responsible for the creation of landscape in the coastal area, which we call it as the agent of coastal denudation. The first one is the wave. Wave is the most important and a powerful agent of erosion or denudation in the coastal areas. The movement of energy through a fluid, when we say sea wave, they are produced by localized storm activity. Swell wave they are the long wave surface waves that had moved out and away from the area in which they were formed by the tropical storm or other wind systems. Surf is the sequence of breaking waves. Swash and backwash is the water is sliding up the beach, and backwash is the water is flowing back down into the sea. These are all the sequences of the waves that actually creates the landform along the coastal area. So swash, the pictures, and this is something very common. It happens all the time. The sea wave comes and it breaks along the shore, and water goes up, swings up, and then it goes down again. This movement is called as swash as it goes up. It is called as backwash as it goes down. They are responsible for moving the sand particles all along the coast. Wave length and wave height plays a very important role in coastal process. In the open sea, the waves are of larger wavelength. So a time comes, as we see here in this slide. This is the wave base. That means to say that every particle of water which is there on the surface is moving in a circular position. The particle which is below there is dragged by that, and it goes in a smaller circular motion. And this motion stops at a point which we call it as wave base. As the wave is coming towards the shore, the wave base touches the floor, and then the wave height starts increasing and it starts bending. And as it comes to the complete shore, then it breaks, and that is where the swash and backwash happens, and that is what we call it as the surf zone, the breaking zone. Surfing is an activity in many parts of the world. It's a sports which is very, very common. And sometimes this surf can be very, very tall or very high. These are plunging breakers. Wave refraction. In deep water away from the coastline, waves arrive undistorted. As the wave begins to arrive at the coastline, the water becomes shallow, and so the wave begins to be bent by the process of wave refraction. And along the bay and headland, this refraction can be seen very vividly. That along the bay, the wave comes and concentrates, and along the bay, it starts spreading away. So erosion is concentrated more on the bay region. The picture which we see, it indicates the wave refraction. So in the open sea, it comes without any disturbance, but as it encounters the configuration of the coast, like headland or bay, it starts bending, which we call it as wave refraction, and they are shown very clearly in these pictures. Current is another process of denudation along the shore. There are three types of currents which are actually working along the coastal area, shore zone. The first one is called as the longshore current that runs parallel to the shoreline. The second is the rip current, that is a circular eddy kind of a motion. And the third one is the tidal current. parallel to the seashore, a small drift or current is happening that is generated by waves coming to an angle to the shore. The rip current is something which is a little away from where actually the water is coming, the swash and backwash zone, and it is an eddy motion. Such kind of rip current, it can be very dangerous. That this eddy is very powerful. It can drag a swimmer down. So this also is responsible for a lot of sediment movement along. And tide. It is the gravitational attraction of sun and moon causes tide. Water goes. There are different type of tides, but mostly twice in a day in most of the coastlines of the world, we have got a high tide and a low tide at the interval of roughly around 6 hours, or we even can have 12-hour cycle as well. So this tide is also a process of sediment movement. So it also plays a role in creating the landforms. There are spring tides and there are nip tides. So especially when it is the tides during the full moon and new moon, during the spring tides and nip tides, the effect of the tide becomes a lot more along the coastal area. So as the height of the tidal level becomes the maximum, the material or the sediment which are scoured from the ocean bottom goes up and it goes down. So those are the times that the maximum effect is happening. During the full moon, moon phases, moon, sun and earth are aligned, causing a greater gravitational pull on the earth, and the effect also is more in geomorphology. So how swash and backwash work? Wind drives the sea water, the waves. So wave comes in almost all the times in an angle. So with an angle it comes up on the shore, which we call it as the swash. But when it comes down as backwash, it is pulled by the gravity and it goes in the 90 degree to the shoreline. This is what is creating that longshore drift, which are responsible for formation of many sandbars. The combination of beach drift and a longshore drift is referred to geomorphology as the littoral drift. So drift means nothing that the sediment is drifting by the action of the waves and currents. So this is how it happens, that the material is pushed up and down, up and down, up and down. So if we happen to have a boat, if we make a paper boat and leave it here along the shore, after 1 or 2 hours we will see that it has drifted to some direction parallel to the shore. This is the result of the longshore drift. The shifting of beach material, though through the swash and backwash of the breaking waves, also result in the sidewise movement known as the beach drift. In the shore zone, a longshore current runs parallel to the shoreline to also carry sand along the sea bottom. The combination of beach drift and longshore drift is what we refer to as littoral drift. These are some of the pictures. Coastline can be rocky coastline and it is non-rocky coastline. Non-rocky coastline can be mud coastline or muddy coastline and sandy coastline. In the rocky coastline, and now in India we have got two distinct types. The western coast of India is characterized by rocky coastline, and all the features that we are going to discuss right now, they are going to be found in all this coastal zone of Maharashtra and down south. The first erosional feature is the sea cliff, then the wave cut platform, sea caves and the sea stacks. These are the erosional landscape which are associated with the rocky coastline. The first and foremost is a cliff. In all the rocky coast, cliff is very common, the vertical drop. The height could be from few meters to several tens of meters depending on which kind of rock type where it is flowing. So there are several examples of sea cliff all along, and they are also very common in the areas where the limestone is there. And spectacular example we can find it in, this is from Boulogne, which is in France, where a mighty cliff, we can see it here. So these are all the example and a picture of sea cliff. This is the platform. This is what we call it as the wave cut platform, another very common feature in the rocky coastline. The action of the sea is tempering and cutting a platform along, and behind this platform many times is backed by a cliff, and the cliff many times they are notched from the bottom many times, and especially if the rock is soluble, it's a very, very common feature. The next point is, how do the sea water erode? There are 4 processes: attrition, corrosion, and hydraulic action. I'm going to start with corrosion, the one which is in the third. Solution, the other name of that is solution. Sea water with salt and other chemicals dissolve in that, dissolve the minerals which are there in the rock when it comes into contact with it, and it becomes more prominent in the soluble rocks like limestone or dolomite, where CaCO3 is the main component. That is how erosion is done. Another one is called as corrosion. As the sea waves and currents are coming, it carries with it a lot of material and it blasts against the wall. See the platform as well as on the cliff. And the grinding action of those material causes the rock to get eroded. The third one is called as attrition. The material grind against each other and become smaller and smaller. And the fourth type is the hydraulic action. Just the sheer force of water which is blasting on the wall creates dislodge or erode the cliff as well as any rock outcrop which is exposed. And many times a sea cliff has got a notch. Notch means like a cut, because the actual contact of water with this cliff is only up to the high tide actually. If there is a strong wave comes, like tsunami waves or let us say hurricane waves, that is a different question. Otherwise, it is only up to a certain level, up and down, that the water is moving. So the upper portion is there that it starts cutting into a notch, and this is extremely common in all the rocky coastlines. And the cliff retreats parallel to itself. So it always maintains a 90 degree. That is because the entire height of the cliff is not under the influence of water. It is only the down part. So it is going to notch it. The upper portion become unstable and it will start breaking, which we call it as the mass movement. So it will go parallel to itself, parallel to itself, parallel to itself. It recedes backward. Headland and bay. In all the rocky coastline, it is a very common arrangement. Headland is the portion which is coming, protruding, and the bay is the concave portion. Yeah. And it is along this bay that the eroded material from the headland is deposited. And that is mostly where the sea beaches are formed. So these beaches actually are the product of eroded sediment which has come from the headlands. So wave energy is concentrated at the headland and dispersed in the base. It causes erosion of the headlands and creation of erosional features. So a cliff sometimes can be directly immersed coming up from the water, but in many situations there is a platform before that. And we can see that the platform which we see right now is the result of recession of this cliff. So this cliff maintains its angle and recedes backward. Sometimes the rock, the platform can be completely bare, or sometimes they can be covered even with vegetation. There are several examples of them all along the western coasts of India and outside as well. Caves. Cave is another very common feature, that sea water actually creates caves along the wall or along this cliff. The caves can be sometimes very, very large, or sometimes it can be small. This is called as the sea stack. They are the different process of consumption of the rock. First a cliff is there, later on caves are formed, the arches are formed, and finally such sea stacks. And see, this sea stack is going to get eroded and tumble, and the cliff is going to recede parallel to itself. So these are the example from the Melbourne. The sea caves, we can see it. This cartoon very simply explains the consumption of the cliff. So there was a headland. The headland is the portion where the wave is going to attack because of refraction, and then afterwards it forms into a cave first and then sea arched. The roof of the sea arch collapses and form into the sea stacks. Sea stacks become lower in the height and it gets eroded completely, and finally the entire headland is consumed. The material which is eroded from here is deposited along this concave portion, which we call it as bay, and that is where the beaches are formed. This is called as geyser or sea geyser, or it is called as geo in geomorphology. This is a fountain which we find all, not everywhere. In the picture, this is from Kayama, which is there in Sydney. And I took this picture. What we see is a giant joint is there, and there is a cave. So during the high tide or during a high wave period, the water come and blasts. It comes through this narrow opening and it forms into a geyser like this, which we call it a geo. This we have it in Hedvi in Maharashtra. This feature which we'll find it. Then emergent coastline. Emergent coastline shows different characteristics. So a coastline is coming up from the sea level. So here is the sea level and it is coming up. So each time it comes up, it creates a terrace. It comes up, could be due to several reasons, but tectonic is the most important reason. Non-rocky coastline, or simply let us say sandy shore or sandy coast, as well as muddy coast. First, let us see what are the features that we find in sandy shoreline or sandy coast. Beach is invariably a feature which we find in such kind of coastline. Spit, sandbars, tombolo, and the barrier reef. So let us see one by one each one of them. Sea beach is very common, and everybody has seen it sometime or other in our lives. Essentially they are concave because the sand which is there forming the beach is actually coming from erosion of the coastline, maybe partially from the river sediment which is coming, but more or less it is the result of erosion, breaking down of the rocks, surrounding rock, and deposited naturally in a concave setup. Very rarely, very rarely, we find a beach which is convex in shape. So we have it here all along. In India itself, we have got several thousands of kilometers of coastline. The whole world, if you look at it, we have got long coastline of different characteristics in the different climatic zone. So beach is very common. Sometimes they can be extremely extensive or they can be very pocket or very small. Beaches. Beaches can be sandy. Such sandy beaches are very common, but there are also such kind of beaches where instead of sand we have got pebbles and gravels, which we call it as a shingle beach. Pebbles or cobbles, they have come from the erosion of this cliff and they can be of different shape and size depending on what is the lithology which is constituting that coastal region. And once again, such kind of shingle beaches are found extensively in western coast of Maharashtra as well. We have already discussed about swash and backwash in the previous section. Swash and backwash is creating the littoral drift, longshore drift, yeah. This longshore drift is responsible or it is capable of carrying the sand parallel to the shore and creates sandbars. So sandbar is a very prominent feature of the sandy beaches. Based on the shape that it has acquired, there are different names given to it. They are simply called as spit if it is just a straight line. They become recurved spit if it is curved a little. And sometimes it grows to such an extent that it joins one headland with another headland and it encloses a kind of a lagoon which we call it as bay mouth bar. Such kind of features are found in Sri Lanka. We find it in Andaman, Lakshadweep. They are very common over there. This is an actual photograph which is very interesting. It is a recurved spit, a spit which is turning. This is so what we can see is the longshore drift is taking the sand parallel to it, and the wave action, a powerful wave action sometimes turns it. In due course of time, such kind of spits are formed. It is a satellite image where we can see the spit is really growing a long distance and it is turning into. The moment it touches the mainland, it is going to enclose the lagoon, and that is what is called as the bay mouth bar. A tombolo is a feature. Once again, very interesting, but this is also formed by the longshore drift only or littoral drift. We have got an island which is not very far away from the mainland. Okay. The sandbar is growing towards that island, and in due course of time, many times a day comes that this sandbar is going, it is touching and creating kind of a bridge between the mainland and the island. This entire feature is called as a tombolo, which looks like we have got the mainland here, a kind of a straight line going ahead of it. It can be of any width depending on how much of sand supply is there. And there is another island. This is called as a feature. This feature is called as tombolo. Once again, it is formed by the longshore drift only, because once the sand is accumulated, it starts growing and a land is there right in front of it to block it. So this is a very interesting feature. Barrier islands, a long ridge of sand or narrow island that lies parallel to the shore. A lagoon is a small body of water separated from the sea by a low, narrow strip of land. So, Bay Barrier, we have got mud coastline, tidal flats and marshes. So, shingle beach we have seen, sandy beach we have seen, the rocky platform, but many times we have got muddy or mud coastlines as well. It's very dangerous. We cannot go here because it's like a quicksand that we will get ourselves buried into it. And here, many times, river creates a meandering river, and along here, mangrove swamps are developed. Mangrove swamps are very common in all the coastal areas, but the largest which we find in India is called as Sundarban. Not only in India, it is the largest in the world. Coral reef. Corals are the organisms. They thrive in very clear water of at least 18 degrees of Celsius temperature and shallow depth where the sunshine goes. And therefore, corals are found in the tropical seas only. The best example is the Great Barrier Reef, and it is there all along in all the equatorial and tropical seas. When these corals die, their skeletons stick to each other, they are hardened, they become compact, and they build into islands which we call it as coral island. So, coral reef forms a very interesting feature, coastal features. But once again, I am repeating, if we happen to find them in areas beyond the tropics, they are the relic features because this is created only in the warm seawater. A reef is a rock or a sandbar or other feature lying beneath the surface of the water, at least 6 fathom or less at the low water. This is those, and there are thousands and millions of species of this corals. And the Great Barrier Reef of Australia is the best example of that, where it is extending for right from the north till the very south of Australia. Here we can see along the coast. Scuba diving is very common. These are all those corals. They are the live corals. When they die, they are built of calcium, and therefore they'll stick to each other and it starts growing. So these are all the pictures of, and depending on their shape, once again there are different type of coral reefs. Fringing reef is directly attached to an island or a coast. Barrier reef is lagoon between coast and the reef. Atoll is circular reef surrounding a lagoon and there is no land in the center. Then comes aeolian feature along the coast. Coastal dunes are commonly found immediately landward of a beach and are made up of large linear accumulations of sand. So in the desert areas, we have got sand dunes. Likewise, in the coastal areas also, sand dunes are there, especially in those coastal areas where the sand supply is plentiful. All the different types of dunes that we study in the desert, like the Barkhan, parabolic dune, longitudinal dune, transverse dune, and star dunes, they are all present. So foredune, parabolic dune, blowout, Barkhan, transverse dune, and longitudinal dunes, they are all present. Once again, what kind of dune is created in which coastal area is dependent on how much of sand is there, what is the direction of the wind, and the vegetation characteristics. So in 2 or 3 minutes, I'll give you the summary of what we have done today. We started with the different agents or process of coastal erosion, that is waves and tides and currents. The second point, we tried to discuss the beach profile or the shore zone, as we call it, as back shore and foreshore. Then we came to 2 different types of coastline, emergent coastline and submergent coastline. Then we came to rocky and non-rocky coast, and what are the different features which are found in a rocky coast and what are the different features which are found in a sandy coast. And finally, we also touched upon the coral reefs, which forms one of the most interesting geomorphic features. Nowadays, with the global warming, the sea level is rising. In the past, let us say about 40 or 50 years, the rise in the sea level is becoming a kind of abnormal, which is creating the seawater getting flooded inland. And many of the geomorphology which are present is getting flooded. The prediction in the future is that all the delta area will go underwater in the next 50 years. The coastal cities, the cities which are in the coastal area is going to get inundated. The mangroves are going to be underwater. And slowly we are going to see a lot of change in the coastal geomorphology in the coming few years. So with this, I end today's lecture. Thank you very much.